So the next marine invertebrates we're going to look at consists of a few different phylums that consist of worms, ribbon worms, lophophorates, and brachiopods. And these are some really interesting little creatures. And as we work our way up in complexity of marine animals, you're going to see some other characteristics start to kick in here. First of all, this is the first time, and as you work on the cladogram, you'll see this too, that we see bilateral symmetry. So sponges had no symmetry. Cnidarians had radial symmetry, and flatworms have bilateral symmetry, just like we do. And pretty much every organism that we examine from this point onward, with a couple of interesting exceptions, have this symmetry, have bilateral symmetry, at least in some part or most of their development. We also now see three different body tissues. So on the cladogram, you'll see on the main branch that we're going to put three tissues as a really important point, because all organisms from this point onward have three body tissues. The body, though, of flatworms actually has no internal cavity, so that's kind of unique to this group that we'll see. Has a mouth but no true anus, so these guys actually excrete waste through glands along their body rather than having just, one mouth and an anus and a tube in between. They're a little bit different than that. They have a nervous system. It's like a branching nervous system. And these guys are typically hermaphrodites, so they usually can be both male or female, or both. So some important things about this issue of symmetry. Most marine animals, again, have bilateral symmetry, and there's actually a reason for this, for why bilateral symmetry evolved. You have better mobility in terms of the way body tissues are oriented. And it also, we see an evolution towards having most sense organs kind of concentrated on one side of the body. And that's a process called cephalization. And cephalization we see with ourselves, for example. Most of your sense organs are in your head. Your eyes, your tongue, your ears, your nose. You can hear, smell, taste, see, and touch. You can touch with other parts of your body, but but all of those things happen in your head. And so that's another thing that happened with bilateral symmetry. So radial symmetry, it's a little different. As you can see, it's like a pie, pieces of pie put together. But bilateral symmetry, you have perfect symmetry down the center. So left and right sides are equal. And then another byproduct of this is this issue of cephalization. So all the sense organs tend to be sort of congregated on one end of the body. So the phylum we're going to look at the most is Platyhelminthes. It's a big category, about 25,000 known species. Platyhelminthes are not just marine. We find freshwater species, and we find some species that are not entirely aquatic at all. They have flattened bodies. Some of them are free-living. Others can be parasites. So we'll look at those as well. You might have seen these in a biology class, these little brown flatworms, brown planaria. What's amazing about them is that they're very regenerative. And in my biology classes in the past, we've actually cut them apart. Sounds kind of gruesome, but they actually will regrow entire new individuals from each piece. So if you were to cut just the tail portion off, that tail will grow into another flatworm. It's pretty crazy. So they're pretty amazing little critters. Branching nervous system throughout the body. Again, they do have one mouth, but in green here we see all these different little branches, and those are basically leading to a bunch of different anuses. They have a lot of different guts that excrete waste across their body. And this piece here is actually its pharynx, so this is actually the mouth portion sticking out here. So for reproduction, they have, again, they're hermaphrodites usually, so they have both sets of male and female gonads. And they can actually swap gonads with each other. They call that reciprocal copulation. So that way they can, there's a little bit more genetic diversity. So they can switch eggs and sperm. Or, if there's no others around, they can just fertilize themselves. So here's an example of the regeneration. So you cut the tail off. This tail will then become a new individual with new eyes and everything. So. A couple different types of Platyhelminthes. Turbularians is one category. These guys are kind of cute. These are the free-living, non-parasitic variety. They tend to be kind of thin and long and ribbon-looking, marine or freshwater. They're mostly bottom dwellers, and these guys can actually produce a little bit of slime, and they sort of flutter through the water, so they're kind of neat-looking. Trematodes are another group of Platyhelminthes. These guys are parasitic. They're also known as flukes. might be the term for them. They have a sucker attached to their head, and so these guys will attach onto an organism and suck nutrients through its blood. So trematodes can be kind of nasty, little parasites. Cestodes, even more nasty. These are also a parasitic type of worm. These guys are also known as tapeworms. So maybe you've had a tapeworm, or maybe one of your pets, like your dog or your cat, has had a tapeworm. It's very unpleasant. You have a head here that has what's called a scolex, this little ring of hooks that it uses to hook onto the inside of the digestive tract or the intestines of an animal. And then it will grow, and it will grow this long, it looks kind of like a tape measure body, and it will keep growing. It will just go on and grow as long as it's in there. So sometimes people can have their entire intestines fill up with this, and can cause big health problems. It can even kill people. What's really scary is that back around the turn of the century, women used to actually ingest tapeworms on purpose to lose weight, because the tapeworm then eats up a lot of your nutrients, and so rapid weight loss is one symptom of having a tapeworm, having a parasite. And it's not good. They're often, the other symptoms are far worse. You become weak, you become depleted of critical nutrients, and then, of course, you're not absorbing the calories that you need, and so people can get very sick that way. Another phylum, so that kind of summarizes those three are in Phylum Platyhelminthtes. But another phylum of worms that we're also going to look at are Nematera. These guys are ribbon worms. They have kind of long, thick bodies, and they're benthic, so we find them down dwelling in the sand a lot. Some can be over 100 feet long, so they can be enormous. So really long, bottom-dwelling worms. They feed on annelids, which are another type of worm. We're going to see them later on, and crustaceans. So these guys have a long, sticky tongue called a proboscis. Here's one here that sticks out, and it can actually attach onto something and either suck out its body fluids or puncture it and kill it. So we're just going to breeze through some of these phylums just so you get a sense of what they are, but we're not going to spend too much time on them. Just wanted you to be aware of them. So there's a couple of phyla within the category called Lophophorates. These are animals that have what's called a lophophore, or it's a long, kind of like a tongue, really, used for filter feeding and for gas exchange. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's kind of cool. They can be really pretty. These are important filter feeders that we see dwelling in rocks and in the sand. Here's members of phylum Phoronida. These guys they almost look like little Christmas trees. That's their lophophore, or their feeding appendage that sticks out. So they almost look like feathers. And again, they're used for filter feeding. These guys can be up to a foot long. They can have a kind of a protein exoskeleton that helps it attach into the sediment. And here's what it would look like in a cross section. So here's the body of the animal inside, and then this is the lophophore, or the feathery feeding appendage. So you can see them here. They're actually really pretty. They look like little trees or little flowers. It would be really easy to confuse them with a plant. And then the other phylum that has the lophophore are the phylum beyond lophophores are Ectoproctas. These are known as bryozoans, and these guys look a lot like the hydras that we saw in phylum Cnidaria, but they're not in fact hydras. They're not cnidarians at all. So these guys are also a type of worm, but again, easy to confuse them. They look a lot like a branching hydra. So these guys tend to live in shallow water in a lot of colonies. They have fuzzy kind of growth for filter feeding. So these guys are going to be also filter feeding their food. And then the last phylum we'll look at are called brachiopods. Brachiopods, they look almost like a clam, but they're not. So these guys have a shell-like appearance. They do excrete a shell, a chitinous shell, and they have also a long fleshy stalk that's right here. It's called a pedicle, and this will stick out and it will attach down into the substrate. So these guys actually are stuck to the bottom, unlike a clam. They also have a big filter feeding appendage, like a feather on the inside, so they can stick that out and filter feed. So these guys are pretty interesting. They can eat algae or anything floating in the water. And they have an appearance like they're a clam, like they're a mollusk, but they are not. So as we're going to see, there are a lot of organisms that might be a little confusing because they look like they should be in one category, but they're really in another. So just kind of bear with me on this. I'm not going to expect you to know a lot of the intricate differences between them, but I just want you to be aware when we're learning about worms, for example, that these are all types of marine worms and that there's a lot of diversity. So that's the big takeaway from this, is that you have some that are free swimming, like the turbellarians, some that are parasitic, like the trematodes and the cestodes, and then others that bury down into the sediment that are little burrowers and will filter feed. So just sort of be aware of those major distinctions between them. And then just so you know, over on the other side of the page, I put here on the right side a long list of worm basics. Check that out just so you can kind of keep track of what are the big characteristics between them and how are they different. Okay, so that's all for this week's notes, and be working on the cladogram. I think a lot of these things will make more sense once you put them on the cladogram and see how they relate to each other.